James Miller stood at the entrance of the Galactic Academy of Sciences, his gray suit neat and pressed, his back straight despite the weight of representing all of humanity. The massive crystal building sparkled under 3 different suns, its architecture designed to impress visitors from 1,000 worlds. But today, like every other day for the past year, James felt more like a child at an adult's table than an equal representative. Ah, look who's here, our short-lived friend. The booming voice belonged to Ambassador Reed of the Centaurians, his tall, silvery form towering over James. Tell me, Miller, how old are you now? 40. 50. Must be nearing your end soon. Other alien delegates in the grand hallway snickered. The joke wasn't new, but they never tired of it. James kept his face neutral, though his hands tightened into fists inside his pockets. I'm 38, Ambassador Reed, and as you well know, humans can live past 100 now. Reed waved his long-fingered hand dismissively. 100 years. My dear boy, I was already learning quantum mechanics when your great-great-grandparents were fighting with wooden sticks. How can you possibly understand the long-term consequences of galactic policies? James followed the group into the main conference room, taking his seat at the massive round table. The room buzzed with activity as representatives from 30 different species settled in. Most of them lived for centuries. The Centaurians for 800 years, the blue-skinned Aldarians for 500, even the plant-like Verdants lived for 300 years. The matter at hand, announced Head Counselor Thex, his crystalline body catching the light, is the proposed permanent seats for emerging spacefaring civilizations. James straightened in his chair. This was important. Humanity needed a permanent voice in galactic affairs. I move to deny the human application, Reed said immediately. Their perspective is too limited by their brief existence. How can they vote on projects that will take centuries to complete? Agreed, hummed Ambassador Lux of the Aldarians. They're like children. My houseplant has lived longer than their oldest members. The chamber filled with polite laughter. James stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Our brief lifespans have taught us to make every moment count, he said firmly. Humans have gone from horse-drawn carriages to interstellar travel in just 2 centuries. Yes, interrupted Reed. You advance quickly because you have to, like insects rushing about before winter comes. But galactic politics requires patience, perspective, wisdom. These things come with time. Time you simply don't have. Perhaps, suggested Lux with fake kindness, we could offer them a temporary seat, to be renewed every few generations as their representatives die off. More laughter. James felt his face growing hot, but kept his voice steady. Humanity has contributed more scientific advances in the past 50 years than. Oh, we acknowledge your species' clever little discoveries, Reed said. But this council makes decisions that affect millennia. We plan for the long term. Can you even imagine 1,000 years, Miller? Can your brief mind grasp it? James opened his mouth to respond, but Head Counselor Thex raised a hand for silence. We will put the matter to vote next week. Though I must admit, Ambassador Reed raises valid concerns about human, temporal limitations. As the meeting moved to other topics, James sat quietly, enduring the occasional glances and smirks from the other delegates. They saw humans as mayflies, bright, energetic, but ultimately insignificant in the grand flow of time. Little did they know that tomorrow's session would bring a visitor who would shatter their comfortable assumptions about human lifespans. For now, though, James could only grip his datapad and endure their mockery, counting the hours until he could return to the human embassy and escape their patronizing stares. The 3 suns began to set outside the crystal walls, casting long shadows across the conference room. Just like these shadows, change was coming, but not in the way any of the long-lived species expected. The next morning, the Galactic Academy's main hall buzzed with unusual excitement. James Miller noticed the change as soon as he entered. Delegates were huddled in groups, whispering and pointing at their datapads. Even Ambassador Reed looked troubled, his silvery face creased with concern. "Miller," Reed called out, his usual mockery absent. "What is the meaning of this? Who is this human your embassy has registered as a special witness?" Before James could answer, the grand doors opened. The room fell silent as an elderly human man walked in. He moved slowly but steadily, his white hair neatly combed, wearing a simple black suit. Despite his apparent age, his blue eyes were sharp and clear, taking in the room with quiet interest. "This is Thomas Walker," James announced, trying to hide his own surprise. He had received only basic instructions. "Introduce this man and let him speak. He's here to address the council regarding humanity's application for a permanent seat." Reed stepped forward, towering over Walker. "According to these registration documents, you claim to be 200 years old." His tone dripped with disbelief. "Do you take us for fools? Humans don't live past 120, at most." Walker smiled, the kind of smile that suggested he had seen this kind of doubt many times before. "Would you like to test me, Ambassador Reed? Perhaps about the events of 1850. I remember that year quite well. I was 26 when I watched them lay the first underwater telegraph cable." The room erupted in murmurs. Head Counselor Thex raised his crystalline form from his seat. "These are matters of historical record. Anyone could study them." "True," Walker replied. "But what about the smell of London's coal smoke in winter? The sound of horses' hooves on cobblestones? The taste of bread from McCarthy's bakery on Fleet Street? Things that never made it into your historical records." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. Inside was an ancient piece of paper, a newspaper clipping yellowed with age. The date clearly showed March 15, 1851. Next to it was a photograph, brown with age, showing a young man in Victorian clothes who was unmistakably Walker. The alien delegates crowded around, their scanning devices confirming the artifact's age. Real paper, real ink, real silver nitrate photograph, all genuinely from the 1850s. "Impossible," whispered Ambassador Locks. "You must have found these in a museum." "My DNA will match the hair follicles stuck to the photograph's backing," Walker said calmly. "I've lived through every major event in human history for the past 2 centuries. I watched the first automobiles replace horses. I saw the Wright brothers fly. I helped build the first computers. I was there when we made first contact." James watched in amazement as Walker pulled out more evidence, documents, photographs, and personal items from every decade. Each piece was genuine, each story detailed with the kind of knowledge that could only come from living through those times. "But how?" Reed demanded, his superior attitude cracking. "How have you hidden this? Why haven't we heard of you before?" Walker's face grew serious. "Because I've seen what happens to people who are different. I watched as humanity both celebrated and feared those who stood out. I chose to live quietly, moving every few decades, changing my identity. I worked behind the scenes, helping where I could without drawing attention. The council chamber had never been so quiet. Even the usually bustling service robots seemed to pause. I'm here now," Walker continued, "because humanity needs this seat, and because you all need to understand something about human potential. Our lives may be short by your standards, but we contain possibilities you haven't imagined." As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting rainbow patterns through the crystal walls, the alien delegates began to realize that everything they thought they knew about humans was about to change. And Thomas Walker, standing quietly in the center of the Grand Chamber, was just beginning to tell his story. The Galactic Council called an emergency session that afternoon. The Grand Chamber was packed, not just with regular delegates, but with historians, scientists, and media representatives from dozens of species. Thomas Walker sat calmly at the center table, with James Miller beside him. "Tell us," Head Counselor Thex began, "what it was like to live through human history, to watch your species grow." Walker closed his eyes for a moment, as if looking into the past. I was born into a world lit by candles and warmed by coal fires. The fastest way to travel was by horse. Most people never went more than 20 miles from where they were born. He opened his eyes and looked around the room. I worked in the factories during the Industrial Revolution. The air was thick with smoke, but people's eyes were bright with hope. We believed we could build anything, solve any problem. Ambassador Reed leaned forward. You expect us to believe you remember details from so long ago. Would you like me to describe the exact sound of the first steam engine at the Liverpool station? Walker asked. The way the ground shook, the smell of hot metal and coal. Or perhaps you'd like to hear about the day I watched Queen Victoria's funeral procession. He pulled up old images on the room's holographic display, photographs and documents spanning centuries. Here's my factory worker's card from 1860, my military service record from World War I, my research papers from the 1960s, published under different names. The aliens studied each piece of evidence, their doubts slowly giving way to fascination. The world wars, Walker continued, his voice growing softer. I served in both. Watched humanity show both its worst and its best. We went from horses and rifles to tanks and planes in just 30 years. Then came computers, spacecraft, quantum technology. If you're so old, interrupted Ambassador Locks, why didn't you guide humanity? Prevent wars. Shake development. Walker shook his head. That wasn't my role. I was a witness, not a god. Besides, humanity needed to find its own way, make its own mistakes, learn its own lessons. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the alien city. I've had many jobs. Factory worker, soldier, teacher, scientist, janitor. I've been married 3 times, outlived them all. Had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Watched them grow old while I stayed the same. The room was silent. Even the most skeptical delegates could hear the truth in his voice, the weight of centuries in his words. But how is this possible? A young Centaurian scientist asked. Human DNA doesn't allow for such longevity. A mutation, Walker explained. Something rare in my genetic code. My cells repair themselves differently. They age more slowly. I've let a few trusted doctors study me over the years, but we never published the results. The world wasn't ready. James watched as the alien delegates exchanged glances. Their earlier mockery of human lifespans seemed hollow now. The interesting thing about living so long, Walker continued, is that you see patterns. Humanity keeps facing the same challenges, just in different forms. Fear of change, fear of difference, fear of the unknown, but also courage, curiosity, and an endless desire to grow. He turned back to face the council. You think humans can't understand long-term planning because we live such short lives. But we've built cathedrals that took generations to complete, started projects knowing we wouldn't live to see them finished, planted trees knowing only our grandchildren would enjoy their shade. The 3 suns were setting now, casting long shadows across the chamber floor. Walker's white hair glowed in the fading light. I'm not here to prove humans are superior, he said quietly. I'm here to show you that you don't truly understand us yet. And if you don't understand us, how can you judge us? As darkness fell outside, the council members sat in thoughtful silence, realizing that tomorrow's session would be very different from what they had planned. The next morning, the Galactic Academy's medical wing was buzzing with activity. Scientists from 12 different species crowded around displays showing Thomas Walker's genetic scans. James Miller watched from the corner as Walker calmly sat through test after test. Remarkable, muttered Dr. Vicks, the Academy's chief geneticist, her 4 eyes blinking rapidly as she studied the results. Your DNA repair mechanisms are unlike anything we've seen in humans before. Walker nodded. That's what the doctors at Johns Hopkins said in 1963, and again at Tokyo Medical University in 1989, and at the Mars Colony Hospital in 2042. Ambassador Reed pushed his way through the crowd of scientists. If this is a natural mutation, There must be others like you. Perhaps, Walker said. But if there are, they're hiding like I did. Would you want to become a laboratory specimen? To watch everyone you love grow old and die while you remain? The room grew quiet. James noticed how some of the alien scientists lowered their scanning devices, suddenly aware of how they were treating Walker. Dr. Vicks displayed a large hologram of Walker's cellular structure. Look here, she pointed. His telomeres don't shorten at the normal rate. And these protein structures, they're maintaining themselves like Centaurian cells. Reed suggested, his silver face showing surprise. No, Dr. Vicks corrected. Better than Centaurian cells. Your species achieved longevity through generations of genetic engineering. This happened naturally. More scientists crowded around the displays. James heard them whispering in various languages, their translation devices struggling to keep up with their excited technical terms. But it's not perfect, Walker added. I do age, just very slowly. And I still feel every year in my memories, in my mind. Time is still my companion, just a slower one. A young Aldarian researcher raised her hand. Have you ever tried to pass this trait to your children? Walker's face showed a flash of old pain. My children aged normally. My grandchildren too. Whatever caused this, it's not easily passed on. I've outlived them all. The room fell silent again. Even the longest-lived aliens seemed to understand the weight of those words. Dr. Vicks suddenly straightened, her antennae quivering. Wait, if this happened once in human DNA, it could happen again. Your species might have hidden potential for natural longevity. That's what worries you, isn't it? Walker looked directly at Ambassador Reed. Not that humans live such short lives, but that we might eventually match your lifespan through natural evolution rather than engineering. Reed shifted uncomfortably. The Council must consider the implications. If humans could naturally develop. We're not here to discuss theoretical futures, James interrupted, speaking up for the first time. We're here to show that humanity deserves respect now, regardless of our lifespan. Walker stood up from the examination table, his movements deliberate. James is right. My condition isn't a promise of human potential. It's proof that you don't understand us as well as you think you do. He walked to the large window overlooking the alien city. Your species chose to engineer longer lives. Humans might take a different path, or we might stay exactly as we are. The point is, you can't predict what will become. Dr. Vicks's instruments beeped with final results. According to these readings, you could live at least another century, maybe more. Time enough to see humanity's next chapter, Walker smiled. Though I've learned that the length of time matters less than what you do with it. As the scientists returned to their studies, James noticed something had changed. The aliens were no longer looking at Walker, or at him, with condescension. There was curiosity in their eyes now, and something else. Respect. Outside, the city's traffic flowed in its usual patterns, but inside the academy, old certainties were crumbling. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, humanity had given the galaxy something new to think about. The fourth day of Walker's revelation brought storm clouds to the Galactic Academy. Inside the main chamber, the atmosphere was just as dark. Ambassador Reed stood at the center of the room, his silver form seeming to glow with intensity. I challenge Thomas Walker's right to represent humanity, Reed announced. He is no longer truly human. 200 years of life have made him something else, a mutation, an aberration. James Miller jumped to his feet, but Walker placed a calm hand on his arm. The old man stood slowly, facing Reed with steady eyes. Tell me, Ambassador, Walker said quietly, what makes someone human? Your species is defined by its brief, bright life cycle, Reed declared. Quick to learn, quick to change, quick to die. You are like flames, intense but short-lived. This man, he pointed at Walker, is neither short-lived nor typical of his species. The chamber buzzed with murmurs. Some delegates nodded in agreement with Reed. I have lived longer, Walker acknowledged. But every day of those 200 years has been deeply human. Let me show you why. He pulled out an old paper notebook, its pages yellow with age. These are letters I wrote to my first wife, Mary. She died in 1891. I wrote to her every day for a year afterward, trying to keep her memory alive. Walker turned the pages gently. I felt the same love, the same grief as any human husband. Time didn't change that. It just gave me more chances to love, to lose, to feel. He looked up at the assembled aliens. I've worked in coal mines and space stations. I've fought in wars and worked for peace. I've celebrated at weddings and cried at funerals. I've watched the sun rise over London, New York, Mars Colony, and now this world. Ambassador Locke stepped forward. But surely after so long, you've grown beyond human concerns. Walker laughed, a warm, genuine sound that filled the chamber. Beyond human concerns, I still enjoy a cup of coffee in the morning. I still cry at sad movies. I still worry about paying my bills on time. I still feel wonder when I see something new. He walked to the center of the room, addressing all the delegates. You think living longer makes me less human? It's made me more human. I've had time to experience everything humanity offers. Joy, pain, love, loss, triumph, failure. Each experience didn't diminish my humanity. It enriched it. The room was silent now. Even Reed seemed thoughtful. Let me tell you about humanity, Walker continued. We're not defined by how long we live, but by how we live. We build things that outlast us. We teach children knowing they'll learn things we never knew. We plant forests we'll never see grow. He pulled up a holographic display showing Earth's history. Look at human civilization. We've faced plagues, wars, disasters. We've made horrible mistakes and achieved incredible things. Through it all, we've remained human, curious, foolish, wise, contradictory, and always hoping to be better. James watched as the alien delegates exchanged glances. He saw uncertainty in their eyes, but also growing understanding. Yes, I am different, Walker acknowledged. But my difference proves humanity's potential for variety, for adaptation, for surprise. If you dismiss me as not human enough, you show that you still don't understand what humanity is. He turned to face Reed directly. We are not defined by our limitations, Ambassador. We are defined by how we face them, how we overcome them, and most importantly, how we help others do the same. The chamber erupted in discussion. Head Counselor Thex had to sound the silence signal 3 times before order returned. This challenge requires deliberation, Thex announced. We will reconvene tomorrow for a final decision. As the delegates filed out, James noticed something had changed. The aliens were no longer looking at Walker with suspicion or scorn. Instead, their faces showed confusion, curiosity, and in some cases, dawning respect. Walker stood at the window, watching the storm clouds gather and break, revealing patches of alien sky. Tomorrow would bring the Council's decision, but today, he had reminded the galaxy that being human meant far more than the length of one's life. On the 6th day, the Galactic Academy's chamber was quiet. Everyone waited for Walker to speak. Instead of standing at the podium, he walked to the center of the room, holding an old wooden box. Before I tell you why I came forward, Walker began, I want to show you something. He opened the box and pulled out a small light bulb. This was made by Thomas Edison's company. I bought it in 1880. It still works. He held up the bulb, its filament glowing weakly. Edison lived only 84 years, yet his work still lights up homes across Earth. Was his impact limited by his short life? Walker set down the bulb and pulled out a folded paper. This is a letter from Marie Curie. She lived just 66 years, but her discoveries about radiation changed science forever. I met her once. She never worried about how long she would live, only about what she could discover. The alien delegates leaned forward, fascinated. James Miller noticed even Ambassador Reed watching intently. You see, Walker continued. I've kept these things not because they're old, but because they remind me of a truth I've learned in 200 years. Great lives aren't measured in years, but in impact. He pulled out more items: a piece of the Berlin Wall, a chip from the first Mars rover, a pressed flower from the first garden grown in space. Each of these was created by short-lived humans, people who knew they had limited time. And perhaps that's what you've never understood about us. Walker looked around the room. We don't need long lives to make lasting changes. We do it precisely because we know our time is short. A young Centaurian raised her hand. But surely having more time allows for greater achievements. Walker smiled gently. Let me tell you about a human named Rosalind Franklin. She died at 37, but her work helped us understand DNA. Or Stephen Hawking, who faced a deadly disease but revolutionized our understanding of black holes. Or Vincent van Gogh, who lived only 37 years, but created art that still moves people to tears. He walked slowly around the chamber, making eye contact with different delegates. In my 200 years, I've seen thousands of short-lived humans change the world. Teachers who shaped generations of students, doctors who saved countless lives, artists who created beauty that outlasted them. Ambassador Lux spoke up. But how can humans plan for the future if they won't live to see it? That's exactly what makes us special, Walker replied. We build things knowing we won't see them finished. We start projects knowing others will complete them. We teach children knowing they'll surpass us. Our short lives don't limit our vision. They expand it. He reached into the box one last time and pulled out a small seed. Look at this. It's from an earth redwood tree. These trees can live 2,000 years. No human will ever live that long, naturally or otherwise. But we plant them anyway. We protect forests we'll never see grow. We write books for readers not yet born. We launch space probes that will reach their destinations long after we're gone. The chamber was completely silent now. James saw understanding dawn on many alien faces. I didn't come forward because I wanted to prove humans could live long lives, Walker said softly. I came forward because after 200 years, I finally understood. Humanity's greatness isn't in how long we live, but in how much we dare to dream beyond our own time. He placed all the items back in the wooden box. Every human lives with the knowledge that their time is limited. And yet we plan. We build, we create, we love, we hope. We reach for the stars knowing we might not reach them ourselves, but believing others will. Outside, the 3 suns were setting, casting long shadows across the chamber floor. But inside, something new was dawning in the minds of the gathered aliens. A new understanding of what it meant to be human, and perhaps a new appreciation for the beauty of brief but brilliant lives. Tomorrow would bring the final day of deliberations, but today Walker had shown them that the true measure of a species lay not in the length of its days, but in the vastness of its dreams. The final day dawned bright and clear over the Galactic Academy. The great chamber was packed, with delegates from every known spacefaring species in attendance. Thomas Walker and James Miller sat together, waiting for the council's decision. Head Counselor Thex rose, his crystalline form catching the morning light. After much deliberation, this council has reached several conclusions. The room fell silent. Even the usual hum of translation devices seemed muted. First, Thex announced, regarding humanity's application for a permanent council seat. He paused, looking around the chamber. It is granted. A murmur swept through the room. James felt his heart leap, but kept his face calm. Walker simply nodded, as if he'd known all along. Second, Thex continued, we acknowledge our error in judging a species solely by its lifespan. Ambassador Reed. Reed stood, his silver form somehow less imposing than before. I was wrong, he said simply. I thought time was the only measure of wisdom. Thomas Walker has shown us that the briefest life can cast the longest shadow. Walker stood slowly, leaning slightly on his cane. Thank you, Ambassador. But I hope you've learned more than just that. Indeed, Reed replied, which brings us to our third decision. He gestured, and the chamber's holographic displays activated, showing images of the new Galactic Academy campus. We are establishing the Walker Initiative for Temporal Understanding. James watched as the plans appeared in the air. A massive complex dedicated to bringing together species of all lifespans. Lecture halls where long-lived species could learn from shorter-lived ones. Research centers studying different approaches to time and progress. Cultural exchange programs. In my 200 years, Walker said, looking at the plans, I've never seen a better use of time than bringing people together to learn from each other. Ambassador Locke stepped forward. We've already had applications from 50 young Centaurians who want to study human history and culture. They say they want to learn how to think in human time, to feel the urgency and purpose that comes with shorter lifespans. Walker smiled. And humans will learn from you too. The patience of centuries. The long view of history. Together, we'll be better than we are apart. The chamber's mood had changed completely from a week ago. Where there had been mockery, now there was respect. Where there had been dismissal, now there was curiosity. There's one more thing, James said, standing next to Walker. The human delegation has an announcement. He activated his own data display, showing a new research initiative. Inspired by Mr. Walker, we're launching a project to document and celebrate achievements of all species, regardless of lifespan. We're calling it the Legacy Project. Walker nodded approvingly. Because every species leaves a legacy, whether they live for 30 years or 3,000. Head Counselor Fex raised his hands for attention. Let this day be remembered as the beginning of a new understanding between all our peoples. Different lifespans, different perspectives, but united in our desire to learn and grow. As the chamber erupted in applause, Walker turned to James. You know, he said quietly, in 200 years, I've learned that time is like a river. Some of us ride it for longer than others. But what matters is not how long we float, but what we see, what we learn, and most importantly, what we share with others along the way. Outside, students were already gathering at the new Walker Initiative building. Humans, Centaurians, Aldarians, and dozens of other species, all ready to learn from each other. Their different lifespans no longer seemed like barriers, but opportunities for understanding. As the three suns climbed higher in the alien sky, Thomas Walker watched the young students with satisfaction. He had lived 200 years to see this day, but he knew now that it wasn't his long life that mattered most. It was the bridges being built, the understanding being shared, and the future being shaped by all species together, each contributing their unique perspective on time, life, and legacy. The mockery of human lifespans had ended. In its place was something far more valuable: mutual respect, shared wisdom, and the understanding that every life, no matter its length, had something precious to teach.